Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming here. I'm proud to stand before you today with Robert Zink, the Chief of the Fraud Section of the Department of Justice Criminal Division, U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of New York, Richard Donahue, U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Pennsylvania, William McSwain, and all of our law enforcement partners such as HHS, OIG, SAC, Scott Lambert, and DEA SAC, Sue Gibson. Unfortunately, I think all of you know that all too well at this point that healthcare fraud in this country costs taxpayers billions of dollars each year. Even worse, the opioid crisis has cost this nation countless lives. Today, the Department of Justice and its U.S. Attorney's offices, along with its partner agencies, stand together and strike a blow back upon those who have perpetrated these frauds and distributed those dangerous narcotics. Together with the Regional Strike Force, the total enforcement announced today includes 54 total defendants, 48 new charges, 6 convictions by plea. The total losses to the federal taxpayers are $800 million. The number of opioid pills allegedly unlawfully distributed are approximately 3.25 million pills. I'm going to talk to you about the District of New Jersey, and then my colleagues are going to talk to you about their portions of their cases. In New Jersey, we're announcing charges against 18 defendants. That is 15 individuals who we are filing new charges against, and 3 more convictions by guilty plea over the past 2 weeks. In New Jersey alone, we have approximately $308 million of that $800 million in fraud, 1.5 million approximately of those pills distributed, and 450 gallons of codeine cough syrup unlawfully prescribed. Rooting out and prosecuting these abuses within our healthcare fraud system has been a top priority of this district for many years. Today, the charges in New Jersey include illegal activities that run the gamut of the types of frauds we see. We have the overprescribing of dangerous opioids. We have people running pharmacies improperly. We have misprescribing unnecessary medications to individuals, tricking patients, often the most vulnerable patients you can find, the elderly, the sick, into seeking expensive genetic testing, medical devices, or compounded prescriptions they just simply do not need and in some cases did not receive. Our office's healthcare fraud and drug diversion docket is shared by 2 units in the office. We have a healthcare and government fraud unit. It's run by David Eskew. We have an opioid abuse prevention and enforcement unit run by Melissa Wangenheim. We have over 20 full-time AUSAs dedicated to healthcare fraud prosecutions in the district. A number of those dedicated AUSAs are here standing up against the wall today, as well as members of other offices in the strike force with them. Since 2010 alone, the District of New Jersey has recovered, not charged, recovered more than $1.38 billion in healthcare fraud and government fraud settlements, judgments, fines, restitution, and forfeiture under the Federal False Claims Act, the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, and other statutes. That doesn't count today's cases. We've also prosecuted hundreds of individual defendants. We've reached significant settlements that have made healthcare safer and more accessible to New Jersey residents. Since August of 2018, my colleague, Robert Zink, who's the head of the fraud section, has dedicated a regional strike force to the Eastern District of Pennsylvania and to New Jersey. So we now have, in addition to those AUSAs we just discussed, a number of dedicated strike force professionals in New Jersey for the first time. It's approximately 1 year they've been here, and what you're hearing today are some of the early results of that investment. So needless to say, adding that strike force to an already seasoned healthcare fraud group has been a force multiplier for the people of New Jersey. I'm going to go through quickly some of the conduct that we've seen in the announcements, the cases we're announcing today. One of the cases we have is 2 doctors who are charged with misprescribing opioids with some of the most salacious details that I think you could have. One doctor, Joseph Santiomi, is alleged to have solicited sexual favors from some patients in return for writing them opioid prescriptions. Just 20 of Dr. Santiomo's patients allegedly received more than 100,000 oxycodone pills for no apparent legitimate medical purpose from Dr. Santiomo. Dr. I'm going to botch this name, I apologize, Megariotis is an orthopedic surgeon who owns and operates a center in Clifton, New Jersey. In just 2 years, he He's prescribed more than 1.4 million tablets of oxycodone and over 450 gallons of promethazine with codeine. It's a cough syrup to his patients that we allege he has prescribed without any legitimate purpose whatsoever. We have doctors committing compounding fraud. Those of you who are familiar with our docket know we've had some large compounding fraud cases in the past. We've had a doctor, Dr. Ogden, who is pleading guilty to accepting payments of between $20 and $30 per prescription from telemedicine companies to write medically unnecessary prescriptions for these very expensive compounding medications, causing huge losses to the Medicaid system of approximately $24 million. We have an ex-sales rep who is also indicted for committing compounding fraud. He allegedly steered prescriptions for expensive compounded medications to his co-conspirators and took a cut for his role in that scheme. The indictment alleges that that scheme caused at least $10 million in losses to participating health care plans, at least $3.5 million of which was paid by TRICARE, a federal program that pays for health care services for our veterans. Primate Pharmacy is another indictment we're announcing today, which alleges there was a slew of fraudulent activities conducted by a number of individuals, 4 defendants specifically, paying illegal bribes and kickback to doctors, billing health insurance providers for medications that were never actually provided, and opening new pharmacies and concealing the true ownership of those pharmacies to obtain reimbursements. That scheme led to, we allege, at least $65 million in reimbursements for prescriptions that were never actually provided, they never ordered from distributors, and they never had in their stock. The overall fraud, we allege, is approximately $99 million. There's a couple of other cases here. Genetic testing scheme, the ARC Labs case, which I think is, again, preying upon the weakest of our citizens. They were using doctors, paying them bribes, providing patients $75 gift cards, things of that nature to get them to submit to genetic testing. They had physicians involved that weren't actually treating these patients, signing off on the need for the testing. There were falsified records, including lies about patients' medical history or family history, claiming that they had indicators that would require or make that genetic testing necessary, and the losses exceed $4 million on those cases by our count. So we have a lot of people speak today. I'm going to stop there. I just want to make sure that today's message is clear to everyone, that if you put patients' health at risk, if you put the welfare and the integrity of our federal healthcare system at risk, we will work together, as you see from the group of people up here today. We will find you. We will prosecute you. I'd also like to thank our agency partners, which I didn't name, the FBI, the IRS, the United States Postal Service Office of Inspector General, the FDA, and our Medicaid Fraud Control Unit, who have done tremendous work to help out with these cases. At this time, I'm going to ask Rob Zink to come up and make some comments about the strike force work.
Thank you, Craig. Good afternoon. Healthcare fraud costs taxpayers billions upon billions of dollars. And opioid addiction is costing Americans their very lives on a daily basis. The Department of Justice is determined to find and uproot those healthcare professionals who are out there exploiting the opioid epidemic and American citizens, all at the expense of their health and welfare. Now, today I have the privilege of standing here alongside U.S. Attorney Craig Carpenito, William McSwain, and Richard Donahue. These 3 gentlemen represent our 3 most trusted and valued law enforcement prosecutors along the Eastern Seaboard. I also want to thank our law enforcement partners, the DEA, the FBI, HHS OIG, and all of our partners for their tremendous work and commitment in this effort here today. And of course, today's effort would not be possible without the tireless work of federal prosecutors all along the Eastern Seaboard, including offices here in Jersey, in the Eastern District of New York and Brooklyn, in the Eastern District of Pennsylvania and Philadelphia, in the Western District of New York, the District of Connecticut, the District of Columbia, the Western District of Pennsylvania, and of course my office, the Criminal Division's Fraud Section. Now, by way of today's law enforcement effort, we are announcing federal charges and related criminal resolutions against some 53 criminal defendants across 7 federal 7 federal districts in Jersey, Pennsylvania, New York, and the District of Columbia. And these charges relate to schemes involving well over $800 million in provable fraud loss and the distribution of over 3 million controlled substances pills. The number of pills at issue is staggering, and they're a reflection of the number of Americans who on a daily basis take these unnecessary pills, falling further into addiction without the hope of recovery. Now, today's law enforcement action includes guilty pleas resulting from a $1.2 billion telemedicine takedown previously in April of this year. Here in the District of New Jersey, Elliot Lowenstern, the vice president of marketing of numerous telemedicine companies, pleaded guilty last week for his role in an admitted $424 million fraud and bribery scheme, billing for services and products that were medically unnecessary. Now, today's actions represent a sustained commitment by my office and the office of those on this stage to root out new abuses in our healthcare system, including abuses relating to technology, like telemedicine, that is designed at its root to help people, but has been taken advantage of for personal gain. Among those charged today are 15 professionals, medical professionals, including some 10 doctors. As always, when we announce these charges, the allegations are just that, they're allegations, and the defendants are innocent until proven guilty. But in the Eastern District of Pennsylvania, a doctor, a nurse practitioner, and 2 unlicensed foreign medical school graduates were charged with federal crimes, all relating to the false submission of claims to Medicare, the Office of Personnel Management, and Independence Blue Cross. As alleged in the indictment, the doctor charged in this scheme owned a non-pharmacy that dispensed prescriptions and substances, providing patients with goodie bags containing medically unnecessary prescriptions and medications. As alleged in the indictment, these patients were allegedly required to take these bags in order to receive prescriptions for serious controlled substances that they didn't need, illegally prescribed and dispensed controlled substances. Now, as alleged in the indictment, these 2 and other unlicensed defendants, there were 2 unlicensed defendants who allegedly wrote prescriptions. These prescriptions were pre-filled out in blank, and the folks that wrote them weren't doctors. They too, as alleged in the indictment, were unlawful dispensements. And as charged in the indictment, these 4 defendants unlawfully wrote over 10,000 prescriptions for Schedule II controlled substances, of which 7,000 scripts were for oxycodone, totaling well over 634,000 oxycodone pills. These numbers are staggering. And the federal government, for its part, paid over $4 million in fraudulent claims for unnecessary services and products provided by these defendants. Now, today's takedown continues the tremendous momentum generated by the department and our most recent efforts across the country. Since January 1st of this year, I'm proud to say the Criminal Division has charged more than 275 defendants, including some 92 physicians, with either healthcare fraud or opioid-related crimes. Over the past month, the Criminal Division has announced similar healthcare fraud takedowns across the United States. They include locations such as Houston, Dallas, Los Angeles, West Virginia, Florida, Georgia, and along the Gulf Coast. We are proud of those efforts, and we will continue them. The Criminal Division, along with our law enforcement partners here on this stage, will continue to work aggressively to ensure that no one profits from healthcare fraud or the unlawful distribution of opioids and prescription opioids. This includes anyone who exploits the new telemedicine technologies to line their own pockets for personal gain. Corporate executives and illegal drug dealers alike, even those in white lab coats, even those in white doctor's coats, will be prosecuted by my office and the office of those here on the stage to the fullest extent of the law, and that we can promise you. Thank you, Craig.
Next, you'll be hearing from U.S. Attorney William McSwain from the Eastern District of Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Craig. I'm Bill McSwain, the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Pennsylvania, headquartered in Philadelphia. And I'm here to announce multiple indictments in 3 important healthcare fraud cases from my district that are all part of today's takedown. These cases are the culmination of the strong partnership among multiple law enforcement agencies, as well as the partnership with our Department of Justice colleagues who are part of the Newark, Philadelphia Regional Medicare Fraud Strike Force, which, as Craig mentioned, is now about 1 year old, and we're fortunately seeing some great results from that partnership. Before I get into the details of the charges, I want to thank my colleague, U.S. Attorney Carpenito, for hosting this event today and for his ongoing collaboration as we work together on this joint effort. I also want to thank Alan Medina, who is the acting chief of the Healthcare Fraud Unit within the Criminal Division at the Department of Justice. I also want to thank Joe Beamsterboer, who is now the senior deputy chief of the Fraud Section, but when we first conceived of the Regional Strike Force, he was the head of the Healthcare Fraud Unit at the Fraud Section and was instrumental in getting it off the ground. I want to thank them for their continued support of the Strike Force's work in our region, and also the prosecutors on the ground, the trial attorneys, Deb Yaroslowitz, who is here in the back, and also Adam Yaffe, who are DOJ trial attorneys who are now resident in my office in Philadelphia, doing great work. And I want to acknowledge and thank Dave Troyer and Mary Beth Leahy, who are the chief and the deputy chief of the Healthcare Fraud Unit in my office. The citizens of the District of New Jersey, as well as my district, the Eastern District of Pennsylvania, are safer now because of the work we are all doing together as part of this strike force. Additionally, these cases would not have been possible without our federal, state, and local law enforcement partners who investigate and root out healthcare fraud and other criminal conduct that contributes to our nation's opioid epidemic. The law enforcement partners involved in the cases that I am announcing today, many of whom are represented here in this room, are the Department of Health and Human Services, Office of Inspector General, the DEA's Philadelphia Division, the FBI's Philadelphia Field Office, the Office of Personnel Management, and the United States Postal Service Office of the Inspector General. So as today's takedown demonstrates, this strike force has produced exactly what we hoped it would, which is tangible results. We've brought together a wealth of resources, knowledge, and subject matter expertise, all working to stop fraud, waste, and abuse within our federal health care programs and to stem the tide of illegal opioid distribution. These are top priorities of the Department of Justice and top priorities for my office. So the first case we're announcing today is against Timothy F. Shaw of Garnet Valley, Pennsylvania. Shaw is a medical doctor who practices obstetrics and gynecology in Philadelphia. He is charged with 5 counts of unlawful distribution of controlled substances because he allegedly wrote prescriptions for oxycodone for 16 supposed patients without seeing, treating, or examining any of them. Shaw is also charged with prescribing over 29,000 oxycodone tablets that were not medically necessary. In the second case, my office has filed charges against Neil Anand of Bensalem, Pennsylvania, Asif Kundi of Philadelphia, Atif Mahmoud Malik of Philadelphia, and Victoria Makarova of Philadelphia. And this is the case that Rob Zink just referenced in his remarks. Anand is a medical doctor. Kundi and Malik are unlicensed foreign medical school graduates, and Makarova is a nurse practitioner. These defendants were indicted on 1 count of healthcare fraud and 1 count of conspiracy to distribute controlled substances. As alleged in the indictment, the charges stem from a scheme in which the defendants submitted false and fraudulent claims to Medicare and other healthcare plans based on the defendants providing the so-called goodie bags to Dr. Anand's patients. These goodie bags were filled with medically unnecessary prescription medications that were dispensed by non-pharmacy dispensing sites owned by Dr. Anand. And the indictment further alleges that in total, Medicare, the Office of Personnel Management, and Independence Blue Cross paid over $4 million for these bogus goodie bags. Patients were allegedly required to take the bags in order to receive prescriptions for other controlled substances. The charges state that Malik and Kundi wrote prescriptions for controlled substances using blank prescriptions that were pre-signed by Anand or Makarova. Anand and Makarova provided over 10,000 prescriptions for Schedule II controlled substances, of which over 7,000, as Rob mentioned, were for oxycodone, for a staggering total of over 634,000 oxycodone tablets, which were not medically necessary. Finally, the last group of cases involving the illegal distribution of approximately 75,000 oxycodone pills to 12 individuals was charged by my office. We've indicted 12 defendants with possession with intent to distribute oxycodone based on their presentation of forged prescriptions to several pharmacies to obtain opioid pills. The various defendants are charged with having received anywhere from 6,300 milligrams to 135,000 milligrams of oxycodone, and the defendants, all from Philadelphia, would allegedly travel together to the pharmacies to fill their forged prescriptions to obtain pills for sale, driving many miles to Pennsylvania, to pharmacies at Marcus Hook, Drexel Hill, and Kennett Square, as well as to a New Jersey pharmacy located in Mount Laurel. The defendants charged in this scheme are Lamar Dillard, Jermaine Grant, Katrina Tucker, Maurice Bertrand, Courtney Brockenborough, Clinton Monte Bullock, Crystal Coleman, Alan Alexander Harrison, Abdullah Howard, Jonathan Matelis, Marcus Russell, and Joseph Michael Simmons. One defendant, Matelis, is also charged with one count of healthcare fraud for using his Medicare card to purchase prescription drugs with a forged prescription. Now, none of these cases could have been brought without the excellent work of the prosecutors in my office. Again, I want to personally thank the DOJ trial attorney, Deb Urosowitz, for her work on the Shaw and Anand cases, and AUSA's Dave Troyer, Elizabeth Abrams, Joan Burns, and Mary Kay Costello for their work in the last group of cases that I discussed involving forged oxycodone prescriptions. As these prosecutions demonstrate, my office will continue to work tirelessly to stem the tide of illegal, medically unnecessary prescriptions that contribute to the ongoing opioid epidemic facing our country. No matter who you are or where you live, if you illegally peddle these deadly drugs, we will find you and we will prosecute you. We remain committed to stopping criminals who promote the opioid epidemic by preying on individuals who are addicted to these deadly drugs. Thank you for your time and attention. At this point, I'll turn it back over to U.S. Attorney Carpenito.
Thanks, Bill. Now we're going to hear from U.S. Attorney Richard Donahue from the Eastern District of New York.
Thank you, Craig. Good afternoon. I'm Richard Donahue, the U.S. Attorney from the Eastern District of New York. I'm here to announce that as part of the most recent strike force sweep, 5 defendants, 4 of whom are current or former medical professionals, have been charged in the Eastern District of New York with healthcare fraud. We publicize these prosecutions because we want to make it clear that medical professionals who use their license as a license to steal will be treated as criminals because that's what they are. In one of our recent cases, a neurologist has been charged with submitting more than 3,000 fraudulent bills to Medicare for work that simply was not performed. In another case, an anesthesiologist has been indicted for her role in a telemedicare conspiracy, one in which she allegedly received kickbacks for prescriptions ordered for purported patients who were never even seen by a physician. In the third case, a registered nurse has pleaded guilty to possession of fentanyl that he stole from his employer, Nassau University Medical Center. As part of his guilty plea, he will no longer be serving as a licensed nurse. Then there is the case of Andrew Barrett, a former pharmacist who was convicted of healthcare fraud in our district in 2016 and sentenced to 43 months imprisonment. Upon release from his imprisonment, Mr. Barrett returned to healthcare fraud before even leaving the halfway house. He returned to the pharmacies he previously owned, pharmacies that were then owned in the name of his ex-wife, and began once again to submit fraudulent bills to Medicare. Both Mr. Barrett and his ex-wife have been charged. This is just a small snapshot of the latest arrests by our district's strike force. Since its creation in 2009, well over 100 defendants have been charged by the strike force, and dozens of those defendants were medical professionals. Our office already has 5 healthcare fraud cases scheduled for trial this fall, and we intend to hold those charged defendants accountable for their crimes. In past years, our office has also been responsible for some of the largest corporate healthcare resolutions in the nation. For example, last year, AmerisourceBergen, a Fortune 500 pharmaceutical company, paid a combined $885 million criminal and civil penalty after an investigation revealed that the company had shipped contaminated syringes to cancer patients for over a decade. I think the work of our strike force sends a clear message to healthcare professionals and corporations alike. Whatever your position or resources, if you commit healthcare fraud, the Department of Justice will hold you accountable. I want to commend our colleagues in the U.S. Attorney's offices for the District of New Jersey and the Eastern District of Pennsylvania, and our partners in the DEA, FBI, HHS, OIG, and other agencies who are doing so much every day to protect our healthcare system so that it can do what we need it to do, protect American lives. Thank you.
Now we'll hear from Special Agent in Charge Scott Lambert from HHS Office of Inspector General.
Thank you, Craig. Good afternoon. This takedown demonstrates the ongoing commitment and the cooperation of the Medicare Fraud Strike Force partners to eliminate healthcare fraud. For more than 40 years, the HHS Office of Inspector General has been fighting healthcare fraud with increasing sophistication and support from other fraud-fighting agencies. I stand before you today very proud of the teamwork that made today's announcement possible. The men and women you see in this room and the hundreds of other agents in the field are driven by the mission to protect the health and safety of the millions of beneficiaries across the United States. It's important to understand, healthcare fraud is a threat to our country. These criminal actions often harm patients and divert federal healthcare funds intended to serve some of our nation's most vulnerable citizens. Especially deceitful is fraud committed by physicians and other healthcare professionals who we often trust and respect. The medical profession is revered in our society, so it's disturbing when these bad actors line their pockets with scams that put patients at risk. And even when healthcare fraud seems like only a financial-based crime, these actions may hurt the well-being of patients. In some scams, Medicare patients seeking legitimate test results or medical equipment are often instead given bogus test results, unnecessary medical equipment, or nothing at all. In the end, Medicare is charged as if a legitimate service had been provided. With this in mind, we are working smarter and faster to curb these scams and protect our beneficiaries. By leveraging cutting-edge data analytics, backed up by traditional boots-on-the-ground investigative work, we can spot fraud trends, including spikes in the distribution of opioid prescriptions, unusual patterns involving genetic testing, and the abuse or neglect of Medicare beneficiaries. In addition, HHS OIG excludes individuals from federal health care programs such as Medicare or Medicaid for several reasons, including a conviction for health care fraud. Once excluded, these individuals cannot receive payment for any items or services they furnish, order, or prescribe. Bottom line, we are cutting off the spigot of government frauds and preventing future harm to our beneficiaries. It's clear that the threat of healthcare fraud is not going away, but understand that we continue to evolve, innovate, and collaborate with our partners to protect the health and well-being of those who rely on us. Thank you.
Next is Special Agent in Charge Sue Gibson from the Drug Enforcement Administration.
Good afternoon, everybody. Today is one of those days that I'm so proud to be standing in front of you and talking about the arrest that we made regarding 2 doctors that viciously took advantage of the addicted. along with the District of New Jersey. We arrested 2 doctors that the one was responsible for selling or trading sex for scripts, and the other one was responsible for the distribution of combination of medicines that can cause respiratory failure, which in conjunction with a fatal overdose death, we identified him and went after him. It was the hard work that we did with DEA and the District of New Jersey that we were able to get these guys. During the arrest and the investigation, Dr. Santiamo actually documented that he had sex with 5 different individuals and what he had sex for and the amounts that he actually disseminated. In Dr. Megarotis, you know, good old-fashioned police work got to him. So if it wasn't for the combination of the civilian complaints that we had against them, the pharmacists that called DEA to tell them, hey, there's something not right here, local department involvement saying, you know, or letting us know if they have a fatal overdose or if they have an overdose, and if they find medicines near the body, they called us. And just good old-fashioned police work, and the District of New Jersey not being scared to take on these tough cases. So it's because of their work we got these 2. We got them off the street, and right now citizens of New Jersey are safer. Just to remind everyone, Dr. Santiamo was a resident of New York, and he practiced in Staten Island. So New York and New York and New Jersey are a little bit safer today. Thank you.
Special Agent in charge, Greg Erie from the FBI, apologizes for not being able to be here today. We had a takedown in the South today where we arrested 31 individuals in a drug and gang-related prosecution. In his place, Assistant Special Agent in charge, Wayne Jacobs, is here to make comments on behalf of the FBI.
Good afternoon. First, I want to thank our partners here today. Cases like this are amongst the best examples of law enforcement's efforts to protect the American people from those who wish to do them harm. These cases represent willful and even sinister efforts by some of society's most trusted members to divert funds that are intended to serve hardworking Americans. It's quite disconcerting that such a large number of medical professionals, particularly doctors, who are sworn to uphold the highest ethical standards, would in these instances choose to treat federal tax dollars as their own personal slush funds. Healthcare fraud costs this country dearly, not just in monetary figures, but also in ways that are often immeasurable. The opioid crisis we are facing as a country is in part due to the greed and carelessness of unscrupulous doctors and pharmacists who, in cashing in on the pain and suffering of others, inflicted even greater harm in the form of addiction and senseless deaths. Cases like this seek to end the exploitation of some of society's most vulnerable Americans who, like all of us, expect and deserve the quality care and service that we all depend on to enjoy our lives. By now it should be clear, the FBI and our partners do not care about your status in life, your professional standing, your level of income, or your personal connections when you break the law. If you try to scam the system, if you exploit your professional license for your own personal gain, if you mortgage your morals to inflate your bank account, you'll only find yourself in a deeper kind of debt. We're committed to protecting the public. We're intent on rooting out fraud and corruption. We're duty-bound to investigate, track down, and arrest anyone who is breaking our laws. Do not be next. Thank you.
Anyone have any questions for anyone up here?
I'd like to speak to the U.S. Attorney McSwain. I'm not moved where you're alleging a tremendous amount of oxycodone tablets out there. Did you get him? How did you find him? Is it based on a trend in terms of the numbers of pills he's putting out there? How do you get to him?
Well, Jeff, you know that we can't really comment at this point about details like that other than what's in the indictment. We can provide a copy of the indictment to you, but I can speak more generally that that's often part of it, looking at data analytics, which was mentioned, and that can sometimes give us indications of who might be engaged in illegal prescriptions or illegal activity. So that's a tool that we have, but I can't comment specifically on how we started the investigation against Dr. Anand, although I would mention that he was arrested yesterday, made an initial appearance, but he is currently being held and he has a detention hearing on Monday. We have moved to detain him pending trial, so there will be a hearing in federal court on Monday, I believe at 1:30 for that.
Do you, in these, the two docs, Anand and Shaw, did you send agents in? Did they buy from him? Did they record?
Again, I can't get into those details, although if the cases go to trial and as the cases go forward, we will be able to get into the specific evidence and those kind of details. But right now, that sort of thing is not something I can get into.
Do you think Philadelphia and the Philadelphia region has a particular problem with oxycodone and the movement of opioids in the region, considering its high use of heroin, particularly in communities like Kensington, and Philly's highest in the country level of poverty?
Yes, it does have a particularly, unfortunately, a difficult situation in the city. We have high heroin usage. We have high opioid addiction. As you mentioned, in Kensington, we've got sort of the epicenter of the opioid crisis going on right now. And so that's one of the reasons why having this strike force, for example, and being able to have the additional resources from the Department of Justice to help combat this opioid epidemic is so important, in addition to all the normal resources that our office have been bringing towards it. This is probably the #1 priority for the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Eastern District, and I'm very pleased that we have others from outside the district also helping us with it.
One other question. It does seem that these folks were able to put a lot of pills on the street before you were able to shut them down. Are you folks not looking at a way to get to these folks more quickly, if you possibly can, so much product doesn't end up out there?
We're looking as vigilantly as we can. Oftentimes when we're investigating something, we're trying to build the best possible case, and that takes time. And then when we go in and actually arrest somebody, we want to have very strong evidence, and sometimes large volumes of illegal activity or illegal pills, so that that person is going to suffer the consequences. For example, Dr. Anand and Dr. Shaw are facing potentially decades in prison. Again, there's investigative techniques and investigative strategic decisions I can't really get into in the level of detail, but to answer your question, we're very cognizant of trying to stop the pills from getting on the streets, and it's not like we're just sitting back and allowing things to happen. We're trying to step in as soon as we can, also balancing that with the need to make sure that we can bring serious charges and have these folks face serious consequences. Thanks.
Any other questions?
Question for you, opioid epidemic is obviously a concern for residents of New Jersey. How does a day like today bring these charges against these people in New Jersey? Can you expand on how that takes a step in combating this epidemic that is affecting a lot of people?
Well, first of all, I think today is not just about what happened here today in this district. It's about the work that's been done for years in this district, and in particular to focus on the work since we've reorged the criminal division, where we formed the nation's first independent opioid unit at a U.S. Attorney's Office, bringing in the strike force for the first time. The strike force has been around for about 10 years, approximately. The work that we did and the resources that, and in particular, Joe Beamster Barr, when he was the head of the healthcare fraud unit, brought to the table. When Joe came to us and said, we have analytical tools and resources that, even though you have an advanced unit in New Jersey, add to the toolbox that you can use to protect the citizens of New Jersey from healthcare fraud. Today is a culmination and evidence that that formula is working. And I think what's important about today is, I think people who are thinking of engaging in healthcare fraud, people who are thinking of distributing these pills, people who are involved in it are going to look and think twice about continuing their operations, continuing their conduct. And quite frankly, I've said this at numerous press conferences in the past, various different association events and speaking engagements. If you are involved, if you know that you're committing conduct like you read about today, it is on you to come into us. And if you come here, and if you cooperate with this office, if you admit your conduct, if you tell us about the people you're doing it with, you are going to put yourself in the best position to help yourself so you don't face the consequences that will fall upon you if we have to find you through our analytical tools, through other cooperators, through other sources, and bring these cases through indictment, bring you into court. and make you face the consequences. So I hope that this gets out there, and companies, pharmacies, doctors, victims, quite frankly, think about whether or not they know about conduct like this and bring it to the attention of any of the offices up here and help us put an end to this crisis.
Does your office feel like this is more rampant in years past, or is this just becoming a focus for you guys now?
This has always been a focus for us. This district has, for the past 16 years, put a tremendous amount of resources into healthcare fraud. This is not something that just happened when I walked into the office. Governor Christie formed the first healthcare fraud unit in 2002. Paul Fishman dedicated additional resources to that office. Both Ralph Mara and Bill Fitzpatrick, while they were acting U.S. attorneys, focused on these cases. And I can tell you that we have put the largest amount of resources the district has ever had into these healthcare fraud cases, having 2 dedicated units now with over 20 AUSAs. But it's not because anything has changed. This problem has been historic. It's because we're fortunate that this administration has given us additional resources. If you go back about a year or 2 ago, when Attorney General Sessions came in, he announced that he was providing 300 additional AUSAs nationwide. Well, New Jersey benefited by getting 7 of those AUSAs, and we were able to put a good portion of those into the healthcare fraud units, because this is the pharma corridor in New Jersey, right? We have, I believe, 14 of the 20 largest pharmaceutical companies in the country residents here. We are particularly susceptible, too, because we have a large class of elderly individuals living in retirement communities throughout the state of New Jersey. We have healthcare facilities, SNFs, long-term care facilities, nursing homes, up and down this state. We have always had a large target audience here, which is why, as I said, just in the last 10 years when we started tracking it, we've recovered, $1.5 billion in recoveries. And I can tell you, if you go back to the Christie era, we had some of the biggest cases in the country at that point in time, like the St. Barnabas case.
Is the federal government in support of local communities and attorneys general across this country bringing individual claims against opioid distributors in an attempt to win money back for the money they put out to care for people, and secondly, possibly drive these companies out of business?
Quite frankly, it's not our position or our role to support or make statements against what the state attorney general's offices do. They are independent law enforcement bodies, and they make their own independent decisions. I can tell you that it is our view that the federal government is fully equipped to handle those cases, and we investigate those cases, and where we think that they're righteous cases and we can prove them, we intend to bring cases. We won't be deterred by anyone else bringing a case against a company that we think we have righteous claims against. Anyone else? Hope I see you back there. Yeah, we're not here to talk about the North Bergen matters. We've obviously are aware of the news articles that have been written, but we don't comment on whether or not we have any open investigations or what the progress of those investigations are. Thanks. No problem. Anyone else? Thank you, everyone, for coming. Appreciate it.